Okay, let's jump right into this. We have a truly significant document before us today. A major text from a global religious leader taking on one of the most pressing issues of our time, the environmental crisis.
Yeah, it's quite something.
It's called Laudato Si, on Care for Our Common Home, written by Pope Francis. Our source for this deep dive is the Seri document Garajawi Nom 98, which is the Indonesian translation, published back in 2015.
That's right. And while it, originates within the Catholic Church, this document, the Encyclical, it really aims for a broader scope.
Broader how?
Well, it's not just addressed to Catholics. It explicitly says it's for all people of goodwill, which kind of signals that its message, its call for reflection and action, is meant to resonate far beyond just religious boundaries.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So our mission today is to really distill the essence of this, well, pretty extensive document for you. We want to understand what Laudato Si is fundamentally talking about. What problems does it identify? What reasons does it give? And what solutions does it propose?
Exactly. We're going to try and unpack its core message, all based strictly on the text provided in this Indonesian translation we have.
Okay, good. Because it is a deep text, isn't it? Quite lengthy, covers a lot of ground.
It really does. So we'll be your guides, pulling out the most important nuggets, trying to connect the ideas, and give you the core picture. The document itself even acknowledges that on a topic this complex, there's a variety of opinions.
Right.
And our role here is simply to explore this particular viewpoint with curiosity, just understanding what the document says without, taking sides or endorsing anything.
Fair enough. That really sets the stage for a comprehensive look. So where does this deep dive into Laudato Si begin? What's the starting point?
Well, it starts with a call to simply look around us. The first section, Bab Satu, it's titled Apa yang terjadi dengan rumah kita bersama, which translates literally to what is happening to our common home. So, before getting into any theology or philosophy, it just asks us to pause and consider the current situation. It describes a context full of things that have never happened in human history.
Things like pollution and climate change, I assume.
Yeah.
Which frames as deeply linked.
Exactly. Inextricably linked. The document doesn't really mince words here. It goes into detail about the types of pollution impacting daily life.
Like what specifically?
Well, air pollution, for one. It notes its severe effect on the poor, linking it to premature deaths. Then there's pollution from transportation, industrial smoke, substances that acidify soil and water, and a whole range of agricultural toxins, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides.
And there's a critique of our approach to technology right there, isn't there? It sort of suggests technology is often presented as the sole solution, but it frequently solves one problem only to create another.
That's a key point. It critiques that narrow problem-solution approach, saying it fails to grasp the mystery of the diverse relationships among many things.
Right, the interconnectedness.
Exactly. And it ties right into a concept the document highlights repeatedly. The culture of throwing away, or budaya mimwan.
The throwaway culture.
Yeah. And this isn't just about physical waste, like landfill. It links discarding things to discarding people. The simple example it gives is how most paper isn't even recycled.
That's such a clear illustration. It contrasts this throwaway culture with natural ecosystems, where waste is actually part of a cycle. Plants, herbivores, carnivores, decomposers, everything gets absorbed and reused.
Right. Nature has this incredible capacity for absorption and reuse. Our industrial systems, the document argues, have largely failed to adopt this kind of circular model of production.
So we just keep generating waste the environment can't handle.
Pretty much. Waste and byproducts that the earth just can't absorb. And even though we recognize we need to pay serious attention to waste to counteract this throwaway culture, the document says progress remains very limited.
Then it shifts focus slightly, elevating climate itself to the status of a common good, something that belongs to everyone.
Yes, asserting its universal nature. And it's quite direct about the science. It states there's a strong scientific consensus showing alarming warming in the climate system, leading to rising sea levels and more frequent extreme weather events. While it acknowledges other natural factors play a role, it attributes the warming in recent decades mostly to high concentrations of greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, nitrogen oxides, and so on, primarily from human activity.
And it connects this directly to our fundamental economic models, doesn't it?
Precisely. The problem is made worse, it says, by a development model that's heavily reliant on intensive fossil fuel use, which, let's face it, is still the dominant global energy source.
And land use changes, too.
That's another major factor, significant changes in land use, particularly deforestation for agriculture.
So it really presents this as a truly global challenge, impacting pretty much every facet of life.
A major challenge for humanity, definitely, affecting the environment, society, the economy, trade, politics, the whole picture. And here's where it makes a crucial turn. It highlights the disproportionate impact on developing countries and the poor.
How so?
Well, they often live in the most vulnerable areas. They depend directly on natural resources like farming or fishing, which are obviously threatened. And critically, they lack the financial resources to adapt or recover from disasters. Their access to basic services and social protection is severely limited.
That immediately links the environmental crisis to a profound social justice issue. It's not just about polar bears, is it?
Not at all. It sees them as inseparable. And building on that, the document turns to another fundamental resource: water.
Water. Always critical. It points out that the quality of available water is decreasing, I believe.
Yes. And it observes a concerning trend towards privatizing this increasingly scarce resource in some places, basically turning it into a commodity traded on the market.
But the document pushes back on that idea.
Strongly. It counters by asserting that access to safe drinking water is a fundamental and universal human right, absolutely essential for survival and therefore a prerequisite for exercising any other human rights.
And denying that access creates a kind of debt.
It frames the denial of access to the poor as a serious social debt owed by the world, a debt, it suggests, that can be partly repaid by increasing funding for water and sanitation infrastructure for the poorest populations.
What's interesting is it also points out that water waste isn't just a rich country problem. It happens even in less developed areas with, seemingly abundant water.
Which, the document suggests, reveals an educational and cultural problem. It's linked to a lack of awareness about how serious wasting water is, especially in a context of such immense injustice where others have none at all.
Okay, so from pollution, climate, and water, it moves to the land and the life it supports. Biodiversity loss.
Exactly. It highlights the negative impact of replacing diverse native forests with, say, monoculture plantations like palm oil or timber, which just can't support the same variety of life. Converting wetlands for agriculture is another example it gives.
And indigenous communities get a special mention here, don't they?
Absolutely. The document strongly emphasizes that indigenous communities and their cultural traditions are vital guardians of biodiversity. They live in these often delicate regions and, frankly, often protect them better than anyone else.
Yet they're under pressure.
Huge pressure, globally. Pressure to abandon their land for exploitative projects, mining, large-scale agriculture projects that often disregard the environmental and cultural harm they cause.
So environmental destruction is also an attack on culture and traditional ways of life. This seems to connect to the broader point the document makes about the decline in the quality of human life and the breakdown of society.
It does. The document makes an explicit link between environmental damage, current development models, the throwaway culture, and the resulting decline in human quality of life. It paints a picture of, well, urban decay.
How so?
Rapid, uncontrolled growth leading to unhealthy cities. Plagued by pollution, urban chaos, transport problems, visual pollution, noise pollution. It calls many large cities inefficient, wasting energy and water.
And there's a paradox here, even in new developments.
Plus, even newly built areas can sometimes be unhealthy. The document notes the complexity, high population density combined with increased consumption, leading to complicated regional situations. Problems like pollution, traffic, waste, resource depletion, and ultimately a lower quality of life for many. It includes a really powerful quote.
Which one?
It says, "Increasing consumption is as if stealing food from the tables of the poor."
Wow, that quote immediately brings us back to the theme of global inequality.
Which the document contrasts starkly. It compares the foreign debt burdening poor nations, often used as a tool of control, to what it calls an ecological debt.
Ecological debt, how does that work?
It argues that developing countries, often the custodians of major biosphere reserves, continue to provide resources for the development of rich countries, but crucially, at the expense of their own present and future. The paradox is that the lands of the poor South are often ecologically rich and less polluted, yet their access to basic necessities is blocked by trade and ownership systems described as structurally evil.
So it's a clear call for developed countries to take responsibility for this debt.
Yes, demanding that developed countries contribute to paying this ecological debt. This means significantly reducing their consumption of non-renewable energy and actively helping poor countries adopt sustainable development policies and programs. Poorer regions, it points out, simply lack the resources to transition to less environmentally impactful models on their own.
And it's explicit about differing levels of responsibility for climate change itself.
It is. It actually cites the U.S. bishop's call for greater attention to the needs of the poor, the weak, and the vulnerable, who in debate are often dominated by stronger interests. And crucially, it stresses the need to strengthen our awareness of being one human family.
One family.
Recognizing no barriers or dividing lines, political or social, that allow us to isolate ourselves. Therefore, it concludes, there is no room for the globalization of indifference.
That's a profound connection, the environmental crisis demanding global human solidarity. But what about the world's responses to this crisis so far? The document calls them weak.
It really does. It suggests that facing resource depletion could even lead to new wars, possibly masked by noble justifications. War, it reminds us, always devastates both the environment and cultural heritage, a risk massively amplified by modern nuclear and biological weapons.
And is concerned about ongoing weapons development.
Yes, it expresses concern that despite international treaties, laboratory research continues to develop new offensive weapons capable of disrupting the natural balance.
So it urges political action to prevent conflict and actually address the root causes.
Precisely. It calls for greater political attention, but notes strong resistance from, well, the financial sector, and a general lack of foresight in political planning. It poses a really challenging question. Why would leaders cling to power now, only to be remembered for their inability to act when urgent action was so clearly needed?
But it doesn't just paint a grim picture. It does acknowledge positive steps too, right?
Yes, thankfully. It finds hope in examples like rivers being cleaned up, forests being restored, beautified landscapes, aesthetically valuable developments, progress in clean energy and public transport. These aren't presented as solving the whole global problem, obviously, but as concrete proof that humans are still capable of positive intervention.
Okay.
It points out that in the midst of all limitations, acts of generosity, solidarity, and care are bound to arise within us because we were created to love.
That grounds hope in our basic human capacity, which is powerful. But then it pivots back to critique what it calls a superficial or vague ecology. What does it mean by that?
It seems to be targeting an attitude that reinforces a relaxed, maybe even irresponsible enjoyment of the environment. You know, faced with a deep crisis, there's a temptation to downplay its severity or just assume the planet can endure our current habits indefinitely.
Kicking the can down the road.
Essentially, the document identifies this as an evasive attitude, a form of self-justification to maintain unsustainable lifestyles. It's about trying not to see or admit problems, delaying decisions, pretending nothing is really happening.
That's just very relevant to public discourse today, actually.
It resonates strongly, I think. And finally, in this first section, the document acknowledges the variety of opinions on how to respond. It highlights two extremes. One extreme basically believes technology alone is the answer, ignoring ethics and the need for fundamental change.
Like a techno-fix mentality. And the other extreme.
The other sees humans as purely destructive, advocating for reducing human presence and intervention altogether.
So between those poles.
The document argues that between these extremes, we need to think through and propose diverse future scenarios, recognizing there is not just one way out. This opens the door for varied contributions to a dialogue aimed at finding comprehensive responses. So Chapter 1 really sets the stage by presenting the multifaceted reality of the crisis' environmental, social, economic, cultural, and aquifers, and the inadequacy of current responses, grounding the entire document in the global situation we face right now.
It certainly does. And it provides a really compelling context for the next section, Bebi DUA, titled Injil Pinsiptin, the Gospel of Creation. Now, for a document aimed at all people of goodwill, this chapter might seem a bit unexpected. Why include a section specifically on faith?
Well, the document anticipates that question directly. It recognizes that some people, maybe in political or philosophical circles, might dismiss the idea of a creator or see religion as kind of irrelevant to environmental discussions, viewing it merely as a subculture, perhaps.
So it makes a case for the dialogue between science and faith.
Yes, a strong one. It argues that science and religion, even though they offer different ways of approaching reality, can engage in intense and beneficial dialogue. It highlights the specific value of religious wisdom with its unique language and insights. It also points to the Catholic Church's own history of dialogue with philosophical thought, creating syntheses like its social teaching, which, it says, need to keep evolving by engaging with new challenges.
Okay, so that sets the foundation for drawing upon biblical wisdom specifically.
It does. The core belief presented is simple, but, well, foundational. We are not God. The earth was here before us and has been given to us. It then tackles head-on the critique that the Genesis command to subdue the earth has been used to justify environmental exploitation and portray humans as dominators.
That's a common criticism, yeah.
Yeah.
How does the document respond?
It's quite firm, actually. It states that this is not the correct interpretation according to the Church's understanding. It acknowledges that Christians have sometimes misinterpreted Scripture, definitely, but it insists that the idea of absolute human domination, supposedly justified by being created in God's image and given the mission to subdue the earth, must be rejected.
So what is the proper interpretation, according to the document?
The proper interpretation, it argues, requires reading the biblical text in context. And that context, particularly Genesis 2.15, invites us to till and keep, mangusahakan dan memelihar, the garden.
Till and keep, that sounds very different from subdue.
Exactly. It implies a relationship of mutual responsibility between human beings and nature. It suggests that each community takes what it needs from the earth to live, but also has a duty to protect it and help it flourish.
It uses the story of Cain and Abel too, right?
Yes. As an example, Cain's jealousy leads to injustice against his brother, which disrupts not only his relationship with God, but also his relationship with the land itself, from which he's then exiled. It quotes the relevant verses from Genesis and links the failure to care for our neighbors directly to the destruction of relationships with ourselves, with others, with God, and with the earth. When justice is absent, the Bible shows that life itself is threatened. It even references the Noah story, where violence filled the earth.
So these ancient narratives already contain this idea of interconnectedness.
That's what the document suggests, that this ancient wisdom already understood that everything is interconnected, and that genuine care for ourselves and for nature is inseparable from brotherhood, justice, and fidelity to others.
It also draws insights from the ancient laws, like the Sabbath and Jubilee years.
Yeah, presenting them as models for establishing balance and justice in human relationships and our relationship with the land. The Sabbath, the weekly day of rest rooted in God's rest, extends to the Sabbath year every 7th year when the land itself rests, and the Jubilee year every 49th year, which was a time of general forgiveness and liberation for everyone and the land.
These laws seem to emphasize that the land and its resources are ultimately for everyone, not just a few.
Absolutely. They recognize the land and its fruits as a gift intended for all. Those who work the land are instructed to share the results, particularly with the poor, widows, orphans, and foreigners. It quotes Leviticus, where people are told not to harvest the very edges of their fields or gather leftover gleanings, but to leave them for the poor and foreigners.
The prophets are also brought in.
Yes, they invite people to find strength by looking at God the Almighty Creator, emphasizing that His infinite power is combined with a fatherly tenderness. A healthy spirituality, the document argues, embraces God's love and adores His infinite power. The Bible presents the God who liberates and saves as the same God who created the entire universe.
So is injustice something that can ultimately be overcome from this perspective?
Yes, the document explicitly refutes the idea that injustice is invincible. It quotes from the book of Revelation. "Great and wonderful are your deeds, O Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations." The point being, if God can create everything from nothing, He can also intervene in history and overcome evil.
This leads to a kind of caution, though, doesn't it? Against a spirituality that forgets God as Almighty Creator.
That's a key warning. If we forget God's role as Almighty Creator, the document says, we risk worshiping otherworldly powers, or, even worse, taking God's place ourselves, claiming an unlimited right to trample creation. The most effective way to put humans back in their proper place and end these claims of absolute dominion is by remembering God as Father, Creator, and the sole owner of the world. Without this perspective, it argues, humans will inevitably just impose their own rules and interests on reality.
It seems this faith perspective aims to ground humanity within creation, not grant them absolute power over it.
That's precisely it. It discusses the mystery of the universe. The Jewish Christian tradition, in notes, demythologizes nature, meaning it admires nature's grandeur but doesn't see it as divine itself. Paradoxically, this actually reinforces our commitment to nature because it's seen as entrusted to us. It allows us to develop our abilities to protect it and realize its potential without seeing it as some untouchable deity we can't interact with.
So recognizing nature's fragility and value alongside our God-given abilities helps us move beyond that modern myth of unlimited material progress.
That's the connection it draws. A fragile world entrusted to human care challenges us to find intelligent ways to guide, develop, and importantly, limit our power. The document also offers a really hopeful note here. God wants to work with us and counts on our cooperation. And, it says, the Spirit's infinite creative power can draw good even from the evil we do, solving the problems of human life, even the most complex and unfathomable.
So God, in a sense, limited himself by creating a world that needs development.
That's the idea presented, that challenges and difficulties can actually be opportunities for growth because God can work through them with us.
That idea, God working with us, drawing good from difficulty, puts human action and responsibility right at the center stage.
It shifts the focus beautifully. And this leads naturally into the concept of the message of each creature and universal communion. Each creature, it says, in its own way, sings a hymn of its existence. Looking at creation is a way to find God's message because, for the believer, looking at the created world is listening to a message, listening to a voice that is paradoxical and silent. Divine revelation isn't just confined to scriptures. It's there in the sunlight, in the nightfall.
By paying attention to this silent voice in nature, we learn our place in relation to other creatures.
Yes, it quotes this idea. I express myself in expressing the world. I find my own holiness when I strive to interpret the holiness of the world. The universe, in its incredibly intricate relationships, reveals God's infinite richness. It references Thomas Aquinas, noting that the sheer diversity of creatures comes from God's intention, because his goodness cannot be adequately represented by one creature alone. We understand each creature better by seeing it within God's larger plan.
And it quotes the Catechism on the interdependence of creatures, too.
Exactly. The dependence of creatures on one another is willed by God. All this innumerable variety and inequality says that no creature is self-sufficient, but creatures exist only in dependence upon each other to complete each other in mutual service. When we grasp that God is reflected in everything, our heart is naturally drawn to praise him with all creation, like St. Francis in his Canticle of the Sun, which it references.
So creatures aren't just things to be used, they belong to God. They have intrinsic value.
They are yours, O Lord, who love life, quoting the Book of Wisdom. This belief that because we share the same Father, we and all other creatures are united by an invisible bond forms a kind of universal family, a sublime communion that should inspire sacred, tender, and humble respect in us.
It uses a striking image for this connection.
It does. It suggests God unites us so closely with the world that we can feel the denuding of the land almost like a sickness in everyone and the extinction of a species like a painful mutilation.
That's powerful. But it's crucial here that the document clarifies this isn't about making all creatures equal or denying human uniqueness.
It's very careful about that. It says this doesn't mean equalizing all creatures or denying human uniqueness and our specific responsibility, nor is it about divinizing the earth, which would actually hinder our ability to care for it. Such ideas, it argues, create imbalances.
It critiques an obsession with denying human preeminence.
Yes, it critiques what it sees as sometimes an obsession to deny any preeminence to the human person, where there might be more zeal to protect other species than to defend human dignity, particularly addressing the great inequality among humans.
Highlighting the injustice of some people seeing themselves as inherently more worthy, born with greater rights, while others live in abject poverty.
Yes, and contrasting this with some who display their possessions arrogantly, creating waste. It concludes that we continue to allow a few to see themselves as superior, acting as if they have greater rights than others.
This strongly ties the environmental crisis back again to issues of social justice and human dignity. They're not separate issues.
Fundamentally linked in this view. And it quotes again the idea that everything is connected, that humans are like siblings on a shared pilgrimage, bound together by God's love for all creatures and the tender affection that unites us with brother sun, sister moon, sister water, and mother earth.
This concept naturally leads into the principle of the universal destination of goods. What does that mean exactly?
This is a key teaching within Catholic social thought. The document emphasizes the Church's defense of the right to private property, yes, but with the equally clear teaching that private property always carries a social mortgage.
Social mortgage.
Meaning, property should ultimately be used for the common purpose for which God gave it. It's not absolute ownership in the sense that you can disregard everyone else.
And the quote it uses is quite blunt about this.
It is. It is not in accord with God's plan for this gift of creation's goods to be managed in such a way that the results benefit only a few. That direct quote raises a serious question about the injustice faced by much of humanity, where the Earth's resources, intended for everyone, end up being controlled and used primarily for the benefit of a select few.
Okay. The chapter then concludes by reflecting on the gaze of Jesus. How does that fit in?
It notes how Jesus reaffirmed the biblical faith in God the Creator, but added the fundamental truth: God is Father. Jesus invited people to recognize God's fatherly relationship with all creatures, using examples like the sparrows or the birds of the sky to show God's tenderness and care towards every single creature, no matter how small.
It describes Jesus as living in full harmony with creation itself.
Yes, even the wind and the lake obeyed him, it recalls. It stresses Jesus wasn't some ascetic separated from the world or an enemy of life's simple pleasures, citing how he was described. The Son of Man came eating and drinking.
So this counters philosophies that devalue the material world or the body.
Explicitly so. It nates Jesus was far from those dualistic philosophies that look down on the body or matter or the objects of the world philosophies, which, it admits, have sometimes distorted the gospel message within Christian thought itself. It highlights Jesus working with his hands as a carpenter, directly interacting with created matter, which the document sees as consecrating human work and giving it a special value for our development.
So, from a Christian perspective, creation's ultimate destiny is somehow tied to Christ.
Fundamentally, yes. The document explains that creation's destiny passes through the mystery of Christ, who was present from the very beginning. Everything was created through him and for him, quoting Colossians. The prologue of John's Gospel reveals creation happening through Christ as the divine word, the Logos, then adds the astonishing truth that this word became flesh.
God entering creation.
A person of the Trinity entered into creation, sharing its destiny even to the point of the cross. Since creation, and especially since the Incarnation, the mystery of Christ works hiddenly in all of reality without denying its own autonomy.
And this presence continues even after the resurrection.
Yes. The New Testament shows the resurrected, glorified Jesus present throughout all creation with his universal divinity. It quotes Colossians again. All the fullness of God was pleased to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross.
Pointing towards an ultimate fulfillment.
Exactly. It points to the end times when the Son will hand everything over to the Father so that God may be all in all, as Corinthians says. Therefore, creatures aren't just natural realities. The Risen One secretly encompasses them and directs them towards their ultimate fulfillment. Even the lilies and the birds that Jesus gazed at and admired are now filled with his radiant presence.
That's a really powerful theological perspective that deeply integrates faith with the physical world and the call to care for it. It provides a strong spiritual grounding for the document's overall message.
It certainly does, linking the ecological crisis we see externally to a deep spiritual and relational imbalance within humanity. And this leads us logically to examine the root causes of that imbalance more deeply in the next section.
Right, Baptiga delves into these roots, titled Ekar Manusiawi Crisis Ecologists, the human roots of the ecological crisis. The document is pretty clear. We can't just treat the symptoms, like pollution, without understanding these deeper human roots.
Precisely. It immediately points to technology. It acknowledges the immense power technology gives us. Nuclear energy, biotechnology, information technology, understanding DNA. This power is vast, particularly for those who have both the knowledge and the economic means to wield it. It grants them significant influence over all of humanity and the world.
But it raises a critical question, doesn't it? Are we actually equipped to use this immense power wisely?
That's the heart of its critique. The document notes a tendency to just assume that every increase in power automatically brings progress and security and welfare, as if goodness and truth automatically flow from technological or economic might. But the core issue, it argues, is that modern human beings have not received the education to use their power well.
So our technological progress has outstripped our ethical development.
That's the argument. Great technological progress hasn't been matched by human development and responsibility, values, and conscience. Each age seems less aware of its own limits, it suggests.
So the potential for misusing this power grows when we lack that solid ethical framework.
Exactly. The possibility of misuse increases when, in the absence of clear norms of freedom, people prioritize only immediate benefit and security. Human freedom isn't absolute. It falters, it says, when it gives in to the blind power of unconscious impulses, immediate needs, selfishness, and violence.
This sounds like a critique of what the document calls the technocratic paradigm. Is that right?
It's a core element, yes. It argues that a true ecological culture isn't just a collection of urgent partial fixes for specific problems like pollution or resource depletion. It requires a fundamentally different way of seeing thoughts, policies, education programs, lifestyles, and spirituality to resist the dominance of this technocratic paradigm.
Otherwise, even good environmental efforts get absorbed by the same mindset.
That's the risk. Without that deeper shift, even good ecological initiatives can get trapped in the same globalized technical fix mindset. It ends up separating things that are fundamentally connected and hides the real and deepest problems of the global system.
The document also brings back the culture of throwing away in this context, I remember.
It directly links the use and discard logic, the logic that generates so much waste, to a disordered desire to consume more than is actually needed. And it points out that political efforts and laws alone aren't enough if the underlying culture is corrupt and doesn't recognize objective truth or universal principles. In such a state, law is just seen as an arbitrary imposition, an obstacle to be avoided if possible.
This really emphasizes the need for a fundamental shift in culture and values, not just policies.
Absolutely, and it connects us back to the value of work. It argues that an integral ecology, one that doesn't exclude humans, must consider the value of work, referencing Pope John Paul II's teachings on the subject.
It uses the biblical creation story again here.
Yes, recalling that God placed humans in the garden not just to keep it, meaning preserve, but also to till it, meaning work it, make it productive. Workers are seen as those who sustain the fabric of the world, quoting the Book of Sirach. Human intervention to develop creation is presented as the most proper form of care, because it sees humans as God's instruments, helping realize the potential he put into everything. Like another quote from Sirach, "The Lord makes medicines grow from the earth, and the wise person does not ignore them."
So work isn't just about economic necessity, it's part of our purpose and dignity.
That's the view presented. Work is a necessity, part of life's meaning on this earth, a path to maturity, human development, and self-fulfillment. Money aid to the poor, while sometimes necessary for emergencies, should always have the main goal of enabling them to live a dignified life through work.
But the current economic trend often seems to be moving away from human labor towards automation.
The document critiques this very trend, where technological progress is often oriented towards cutting production costs by reducing the number of workers, replacing them with machines. This is presented as another example of human action turning against itself. Job reduction, it argues, also negatively impacts the economy by eroding social capital, things like trust, credibility, adherence to shared norms and rules.
This sounds like a call for an economy that values human labor and diversity over pure automation and narrow cost efficiency.
It is. To keep providing jobs, it argues for an economy that promotes diverse forms of production and entrepreneurial creativity. It highlights small-scale rural food systems as a positive example, feeding most of the world's population using minimal land and water and creating less waste.
But these smaller systems are often undermined by large-scale industrial agriculture, aren't they?
That's the dynamic it notes. Large-scale agribusiness can force small farmers to sell their land or abandon their traditional crops. Their attempts to develop other forms of production often fail because of difficulties accessing markets, or because infrastructure, like transport or storage, is designed to serve only large companies.
So authorities have a role to play in supporting these smaller producers.
Yes, the document states authorities have the right and responsibility to take measures to support small producers and production diversity. To ensure economic freedom benefits everyone, it says, limits are sometimes needed for those with greater resources and financial power. Just talking about economic freedom while many people lack basic access to work and opportunity is contradictory and undermines political discourse.
The chapter also tackles the complex and often controversial issue of GMOs, genetically modified organisms.
It does. It states that making general judgments about GMOs, whether plants, animals, medical, or agricultural, is difficult. Different cases need different considerations. Risks, it suggests, often stem from inappropriate or excessive application rather than the technology itself.
It points out that genetic modification isn't entirely new, right?
Yeah, it notes that genetic mutation happens naturally, and human-induced modification like domestication or crossbreeding has happened for ages. Scientific GMO development actually started from observing natural modification processes.
But the scale and speed are different today, much faster.
Exactly. The key difference today is the rapid pace of technological intervention compared to the slow pace of natural processes. It stresses the continuous need for ethical attention and calls for a responsible, broad scientific and social discussion, one that's open to considering all available information.
And it critiques how information in this debate is sometimes filtered or biased.
It notes that information is often filtered according to particular interests, political, economic, or ideological, which makes reaching balanced decisions very hard.
This calls for a genuinely inclusive discussion involving everyone affected.
Yes, a space for dialogue where all those potentially affected farmers, consumers, public authorities, scientists, seed producers, people living near affected areas can voice their concerns, access full information, and make decisions together for the common good, both present and future. This complex environmental issue needs a comprehensive approach, which requires, among other things, greater funding for diverse fields of independent research.
So the human roots are seen as really tangled misuse of technology driven by a dominant technocratic mindset, a throwaway culture fueled by excessive consumption, and an economic system that often sidelines human work and diversity. All potentially made worse by a lack of ethical depth and foresight. It's a powerful diagnosis of modern society.
It's a very comprehensive critique, and this analysis of the roots leads logically into the document's proposed framework for understanding and, crucially, addressing these issues. BAB-IMPAT, which is titled Ecologically Integral Ecology.
The term integral ecology itself suggests a holistic perspective, right? How does the document define environment within this specific framework?
It makes a really critical distinction. When it talks about environment, it's not just referring to nature as something external to us, like scenery. It refers specifically to the relationship between nature and the society that lives within it.
Okay, so it prevents us from seeing nature as separate or just a passive backdrop.
Exactly. We are part of nature, included in it, and profoundly intertwined with it.
This interconnectedness seems absolutely central to integral ecology.
Absolutely essential. The document argues that to understand something like pollution in a specific place, you can't just study the pollution itself. You have to study the society living there, its economy, its behavior, its way of understanding reality. Given the scale of the changes we face, it says fragmented, independent answers for each part of the problem just won't work.
So we need comprehensive solutions.
Comprehensive solutions that consider the interaction of natural systems with social systems. It states it very plainly. There are not two separate crises, one environmental and one social, but one complex socio-environmental crisis.
Which means the solutions must also be integrated, addressing both sides of that crisis together.
Precisely. The guidelines for solutions need an integral approach. This means combating poverty, restoring the dignity of the excluded, and preserving nature all at the same time. You really can't effectively do one without the others in this view.
The value of ecosystems themselves is also discussed within this framework.
Yes, it highlights the importance of researchers understanding how different creatures relate to form ecosystems. These systems have intrinsic value, it argues, not just value based on how we can use them. Each organism is good and admirable in itself, as is the harmonious unity of the system functioning together.
And we depend on these systems for our own survival.
Totally. For our existence, things like CO2 absorption, water purification, disease control, soil formation, waste decomposition, the list goes on. Many people are realizing, again, it says, that we live and act based on a reality that was first given to us, not created by us. So any sustainable use of resources must always consider the regeneration capacity of these ecosystems.
And the health of our social institutions plays a role in this integral ecology. How does that connect?
A significant one. If everything is interconnected, then the health of society's institutions, families, communities, nations, the international community impacts both the environment and the quality of human life. It quotes Pope Benedict XVI, "Every violation of solidarity and civic friendship causes damage to the environment."
So social ecology is institutional.
Yes, covering basic groups like the family, local communities, nations, international society. Institutions regulate human relations, and anything that weakens them, like loss of freedom, injustice, violence, harms this social ecology. Fragile institutional systems cause suffering and often benefit those who profit from the dysfunction. It notes that laws, even well-drafted ones, are often disregarded or ineffective, citing the example of forest protection laws that aren't actually enforced.
Raising the tough question, can environmental laws really be effective if the underlying social fabric is weak or corrupt?
Exactly. And it points out the global dimension. Again, what happens in one area inevitably affects others. It uses the example of drug consumption in rich societies, driving demand that leads to environmental damage and social breakdown in poorer areas where drugs are produced or trafficked.
The document also introduces the idea of cultural ecology. What does that involve?
This expands the idea of heritage beyond just nature. Our historical, artistic, and cultural heritage is also seen as threatened and part of this integral ecology. This heritage is part of a place's identity and crucial for building livable cities. The goal isn't just demolishing old areas and building new, supposedly ecological cities from scratch. It's about considering history, culture, and local architecture to preserve the original identity of a place.
So ecology here means preserving broad human cultural richness.
Yes, focusing on local cultures and fostering dialogue between scientific technical language and popular language or wisdom. Culture is seen as living, dynamic, participatory. It cannot be excluded when we rethink the human-environment relationship.
This connects back strongly to the importance of indigenous communities mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. Their cultural traditions are key. They must be primary dialogue partners, especially when large projects affect their ancestral lands. For many indigenous communities, land isn't primarily an economic resource. It's a gift from God and their ancestors, a sacred space essential for their identity and values. They often preserve the land best simply by living there. But, as mentioned, they face intense pressure to leave for exploitative projects.
The document also looks at the more intimate scale, the ecology of everyday life.
This is about the link between our physical surroundings, our homes, streets, neighborhoods, and our human behavior. It argues that planners need input from many disciplines, not just architects focused on design beauty. They need to consider the quality of life, how spaces foster adaptation, encounter, and mutual help. Citizen views are essential to complement technical planning.
And maintaining public spaces is key to this everyday ecology.
Vital. Public spaces, urban landmarks, landscapes. These enhance our sense of belonging, rootedness, feeling at home in a city or town. Cities should aim to integrate different parts, allowing residents to see the whole, avoiding closed-off, fragmented areas. Interventions should see the elements of a place as a unified, meaningful whole.
This helps build a sense of community, a shared identity.
Yes, making others feel less foreign, fostering a sense of a we that we build together. It also argues it's important to preserve some places from constant human alteration and change.
A major issue in everyday ecology, especially in cities, is the housing shortage.
Identified as a serious issue in both rural and urban areas, often far exceeding state budgets. Homeownership is linked to dignity and family development, making it an essential issue of human ecology. For slums or inadequate housing areas, the document emphasizes rejuvenation and integration, not just demolition and eviction.
What if relocation is unavoidable?
Then it insists on providing adequate information beforehand, offering genuinely decent housing alternatives, and actively involving the affected people in the process. Creativity is needed to integrate marginalized settlements into a welcoming city. It praises beautiful cities able to overcome crippling suspicion, integrate different people, make this integration a new factor of development. Cities become attractive when they have spaces that connect people, create relationships, and support recognizing others.
But it warns against only focusing on cities, right? We shouldn't forget rural areas.
It stresses that point.
Yeah.
We shouldn't let the urban focus distract from the neglect, often found in rural areas, lack of basic services, difficult working conditions, even situations described as forced labor or slavery-like for some workers.
Integral ecology also implies a link to the moral law, doesn't it?
Yes, human ecology is seen as deeply connected to the moral law written in our own nature, which is necessary for creating and maintaining a dignified environment. It quotes Benedict XVI again, stating there's a human ecology because human beings also have a nature that needs to be respected and cannot be manipulated.
And our own bodies are part of this ecological picture.
Critically so. Our body places us in a direct relationship with the environment and other living beings. Accepting our body as a gift from God is seen as necessary to accept the whole world as a gift. The idea of seeking absolute power over our own body, it argues, can subtly transform into seeking absolute power over creation. Learning to accept, care for, and respect our body's meaning is essential for a true human ecology. Valuing one's body as male or female is needed to recognize oneself in encounter with difference and to joyfully accept the unique gift of others.
So connect self-acceptance, acceptance of others, and acceptance of creation. They're all linked.
It sees them as fundamentally intertwined. This leads naturally into the concept of the common good. Achieving the common good requires respect for the human person and their basic rights, allowing for full development. It demands social welfare and the development of intermediate groups, like families and local communities, following the principle of subsidiarity. The family is highlighted as the basic unit.
And peace is essential.
It requires social peace, stability, and security based on a just order. This isn't achievable, it argues, without attention to distributive justice, because violations of justice often lead to violence. Society as a whole and the state have a duty to defend and promote this common good.
And in today's unequal world, pursuing the common good means prioritizing the poor.
Yes, the principle of the common good in our current global context of inequality and marginalization becomes a clear call for solidarity and a preferential option for the poor. This means drawing concrete consequences from the universal destination of goods, that resources are for everyone, but also paying attention to the great dignity of the poor in the light of the deepest faith conviction. It's presented as a fundamental ethical demand needed to realize the common good effectively.
And importantly, the common good isn't just about us now. It extends to future generations.
That's the concept of intergenerational justice. The document notes how the global economic crisis showed the harm of ignoring our shared fate with those who come after us. We cannot speak of sustainable development without intergenerational solidarity. The world is presented as a free gift we receive and must share. We can't think only in terms of immediate utility, profit, efficiency, or private gain.
This isn't optional then.
No, it's framed as a matter of fundamental justice, because the earth we receive belongs also to those who will come after us. It quotes the Portuguese bishops urging us to see the environment within a logic of reception, viewing it as a loan that each generation receives and must pass on.
So integral ecology is a truly comprehensive framework weaving together environmental health, social justice, cultural richness, urban planning, personal well-being, institutional strength, and responsibility across time, across generations. It's a very broad and deeply ethical way of seeing the world and our place in it.
It really is. And having laid out the problem, the faith perspective, the human roots, and this integral framework, the document then moves into concrete suggestions for action in Bab Lima. Beberapa pedimen orientasi dan aksi. Lines of approach and action.
Okay, action. Where does it start? It talks about the need for dialogue in international politics, I think.
Yes. Since the mid-20th century, it notes, there's been a growing tendency to see the planet as our shared homeland, and humanity as one people inhabiting it. Interdependence means negative environmental impacts affect everyone, which should push us towards thinking about global solutions, not just narrow national interests.
So interdependence demands global thinking.
It argues interdependence compels us to think of a single world, a shared project. But it observes, despite impressive technological growth, we've largely failed to find effective international structures and agreements capable of solving the deep environmental and social problems we face.
So a genuine global consensus is seen as essential.
Absolutely. Essential for tackling problems that are simply too deep for any single nation or group of nations to solve unilaterally. Such a consensus could help plan things like sustainable agriculture, developing renewable energy sources, improving energy efficiency, better resource and waste management globally.
But the document seems quite critical of recent global summits on these issues.
It is, frankly. While acknowledging the real progress made by the global ecological movement and NGOs in raising awareness, it states bluntly that recent world summits have generally failed expectations. Why? Due to a lack of political will, failing to reach truly meaningful and effective global agreements. It points to resistance from powerful economic interests and short-sighted political calculations.
Help for poor countries is also a specific point of action mentioned.
Yes, it emphasizes that poverty eradication and social development are obviously priorities for poor countries. But, it adds, they must also examine the unsustainable overconsumption of their own elites and tackle internal corruption. While they need to transition to less polluting energy production, they require substantial assistance from developed countries to do so, things like technology transfer, technical and financial aid, considering their specific situations and historical context.
It frames the cost of this aid in a particular way.
It suggests the cost is actually low compared to the enormous risks and costs associated with climate change if we fail to act.
Okay, moving from the international to the national and local level, what kind of guidance is offered there?
Law is seen as key for guiding society and establishing acceptable norms of behavior for the common good. Limits are needed, things like foresight, Prudence, regulation, monitoring implementation, fighting corruption effectively, controlling undesirable side effects of development, and intervening when risks are uncertain but potentially serious. It notes a growing body of environmental jurisprudence, which is positive.
So it's not just about preventing harm.
No, political and institutional frameworks should not just prevent bad practices, but actively encourage good practices, stimulate creativity, and support positive private and collective initiatives for environmental care.
It also highlights the importance of local action and public pressure, doesn't it?
Yes, very much so. Small local initiatives can create significant change, it argues, citing examples like local cooperatives for renewable energy or efforts towards food self-sufficiency. This shows, it suggests, that local levels can foster greater responsibility, a stronger sense of community, care, generosity, love for one's place, and thinking about the inheritance left for children and grandchildren. These values, it notes again, are often particularly strong in indigenous societies.
And public pressure is needed when laws aren't enough, perhaps due to corruption.
Crucially, if laws are inadequate or unenforced because of corruption or lack of political will, public pressure becomes essential. NGOs and civil society groups must push governments for stricter regulations, better oversight, and accountability. Citizen monitoring of political power, national, regional, local, is vital for monitoring environmental damage and demanding action. It also suggests local laws become more effective when there are agreements and cooperation between neighboring communities.
But it acknowledges there aren't no uniform recipes that work everywhere.
Yes, it recognizes that each country and region has its unique problems, possibilities, and culture. Political realism may require transitional measures and gradual processes, but these must include clear planning and binding commitments for change. There's much that can be done at national and local levels. Energy saving, through more efficient production, using fewer raw materials, favoring less polluting products, phasing out inefficient ones, better transport management, improving building efficiency to reduce energy use and pollution.
Local politics has a big role then.
Definitely. Local politics can target consumption patterns, foster a waste reduction and recycling economy, protect local species, encourage agricultural diversification and rotation. It strongly supports agriculture in poor regions through things like improving rural infrastructure, market organization, irrigation systems, and developing sustainable agricultural technologies. Facilitating cooperatives and organizations for small farmers is key, as is protecting local ecosystems. Much can be done, it insists.
Policy continuity is also stressed as really essential, especially for climate change.
Very important point. Climate and environmental policies shouldn't drastically change with every new government. Results often take a long time to materialize and usually involve immediate costs or investments. Without sustained societal and institutional pressure, rulers often hesitate to implement ambitious policies, especially when faced with other pressing urgencies.
It frames taking responsibility here as a matter of dignity.
It does. A politician who takes responsibility for these long-term issues and their associated costs goes against the short-term efficiency and results mindset prevalent in today's economy and politics. But if they are brave enough to do so, the document argues, they rediscover their own dignity and leave behind a testimony of generous responsibility.
Transparency in decision-making is another key call to action, especially regarding environmental risks.
Yes. When faced with environmental risks that affect the common good, decisions must be based on a comparison of predictable risks and benefits for each possible alternative. This is especially important for projects that significantly increase resource use, emissions, waste, or alter landscapes, habitats, or public spaces.
Poorly analyzed projects can really damage quality of life.
Absolutely. Things like noise pollution, loss of views, destruction of cultural value, potential risks from things like nuclear waste. It notes that a consumerist culture, prioritizing short-term profit and self-interest, often encourages hasty procedures and the hiding of information, hindering proper assessment.
It proposes a series of fundamental questions that should be asked for any new venture.
Yes. A critical checklist to ensure development is truly integral. For what purpose? Why? Where? When? How? For whom? What are the risks? How much will it cost? Who will pay these costs, and how will they do it? Certain questions, like access to water as a basic human right, should be given priority in any environmental impact analysis because it's such a fundamental and limited resource.
This leads into a broader discussion about reshaping politics and the economy towards genuine human fulfillment.
That's the core argument here. The economy must serve human fulfillment, not just maximize profit at any cost. Politics must not submit to the dictates of the economy or a narrow technological logic. We need, it argues, to redefine what we mean by progress.
So technological and economic development isn't automatically progress.
Not if it doesn't leave behind a better world and a genuinely improved quality of life for all. Quality of life, it observes, often declines even amidst economic growth due to environmental damage, poor food quality, resource depletion, and social fragmentation. The constant talk of sustainable growth is often just deflection or justification, framing ecology within financial and technocratic terms, reducing social and ecological responsibility to mere marketing or image management.
It critiques the profit principle when it ignores costs borne by others or the future.
Yes. The principle of maximizing profit, when separated from all other considerations, is presented as a fundamental misunderstanding of what the economy should be. If you increase production without concern for future resources or the health of the environment, companies profit by paying only a fraction of the real costs. Ethical behavior requires that the economic and social costs arising from the use of common natural resources are established transparently and fully borne by those who enjoy them and not by other nations or future generations. This applies whether resources are distributed by the market or by state planning. The instrumental rationality that ignores these wider costs is the problem.
Bringing back the principle of subsidiarity, politics is seen as necessary and shouldn't be subordinate to the economy.
Yes, politics is essential. Subsidiarity allows freedom and initiative at all levels, but it also demands greater responsibility for the common good from those who hold the most power. While acknowledging that some economic sectors are currently more powerful than states, the document argues we cannot justify an economy without politics because that makes alternative ways of thinking impossible. A mindset that ignores genuine environmental concern also inevitably excludes the vulnerable because the current model prioritizing success and individual rights doesn't naturally support helping those who are left behind, the weak, or the less talented.
Finally, this action chapter loops back briefly to the role of religions in dialogue with science.
Just reiterating the point made earlier that science and religion offer different but potentially complementary and beneficial approaches to reality, and that religions contain accumulated wisdom relevant to these challenges.
So Chapter 5 provides a really comprehensive roadmap for action across international, national, and local levels. It emphasizes political will, transparency, fundamentally rethinking economic priorities, and integrating ethical and social considerations deeply into all decision-making. It's a powerful call for systemic change, moving beyond just individual actions.
It is, linking the integral diagnosis from the previous chapter to practical, though challenging, steps. And this sets the stage perfectly for the final chapter, which looks at the deepest level of transformation needed, the transformation within ourselves and our communities through education and spirituality.
Right. Bab Inam is Pendidican Dan Spiritualitas Ecologists, Ecological Education and Spirituality. It begins with a really striking statement. Many things must be redirected, but especially humanity must change.
Yeah.
That's quite a claim.
It puts the focus squarely on human transformation. This is the core idea. The ultimate solution requires a change within humanity itself. What's needed, it says, is a growing awareness of our common origin, our mutual belonging, and our shared future. This awareness is what can enable new convictions, attitudes, and forms of life to emerge. It's presented as a great cultural, spiritual, and educational challenge, one requiring long, patient processes of renewal.
The document connects the current global situation, the uncertainty, the crises, to egoism and consumerism.
Yes, stating that the world situation often creates uncertainty and insecurity, which in turn encourages collective egoism. Self-centeredness, closing in on ourselves, increases greed. Empty hearts, it suggests poetically, need more things to buy, possess, and consume. This mindset makes it difficult to accept the limits of reality and prevents genuine sensitivity to the common good. Subjective attitudes tend to dominate, and norms are respected only if they don't conflict with our private needs or desires.
So it's not just environmental disasters we face, but social crisis disasters driven by this consumerist obsession.
Exactly. The obsession with consumerism, especially when only a relatively few can actually afford it at unsustainable levels, leads to violence and mutual destruction, both social and environmental.
This means we need to actively move beyond consumerism.
Absolutely. The document argues we simply cannot sustain an unsustainable lifestyle that is damaging, exclusive, and ultimately unfulfilling. It calls for a decisive shift towards lifestyles based on gratitude, moderation, and finding joy in simplicity. Small daily actions, it suggests, can play a role in breaking the logic of violence, exploitation, and selfishness.
And this is where ecological education comes in as a key tool.
Yes, environmental education, it notes, has expanded and evolved. It started mostly with scientific information, awareness raising, and risk prevention. But now, it argues, it needs to include a critique of the myths of modernity, things like the purely utilitarian mindset, the belief in unlimited progress, relentless competition, consumerism itself, and the idea of an unregulated market solving all problems.
So what's the goal of this deeper ecological education?
Its goal is to help restore ecological balance at multiple levels: internal balance with oneself, social balance with others, natural balance with all living beings, and spiritual balance with God. Education must prepare us for a leap into the mystery, which gives ethics its deepest meaning. Educators need to develop pedagogical paths for environmental ethics that effectively foster solidarity, responsibility, and loving care.
This involves cultivating specific virtues, doesn't it?
Yes. Ecological conversion, it argues, flows from recognizing our common origin, our mutual belonging, and our shared future. It calls for cultivating virtues like gratitude for gifts received, generosity in sharing our talents and resources, and creativity in finding solutions. It introduces the really powerful concept of joyful sobriety, kugaharian yang wambahagiakan.
Joyful sobriety, what does that entail?
It means finding happiness in having less, but giving more. Being content with little, finding fulfillment in relationships and experiences rather than possessions. It's presented as a liberating way to escape the often frantic and empty consumerist whirlwind.
But is individual change enough to address these complex systemic situations?
The document is quite clear. Individual improvement isn't sufficient on its own. Individuals acting alone can lose the ability or freedom to overcome the dominant utilitarian mindset, or they can succumb to unethical consumerism despite good intentions. Social problems require community networks and collective action, not just the sum of individual good deeds. The demands are so great that they cannot be solved by individual initiatives, requiring a combination of forces and unity of effort. The necessary ecological conversion is also fundamentally a communal conversion.
The document also links environmental appreciation to finding joy and peace.
It highlights the connection between aesthetic education, learning to appreciate beauty, and environmental preservation. Attending to beauty, it suggests, helps us move beyond seeing things purely in terms of their utility or usefulness. If we don't take time to stop and admire something beautiful, whether in nature or art, everything can easily become just an object to be used, or, sadly, abused without guilt.
So deep change requires a new mindset.
A new way of thinking about humans, life, society, and our relationship with nature. Otherwise, the consumerist paradigm, constantly reinforced by media and the market, will just continue to dominate.
This seems to require finding inner peace and balance first.
Yes. The document suggests that no one can develop a modest and happy life without being at peace with themselves. An adequate understanding of spirituality expands the notion of peace far beyond just the absence of war. Inner peace is deeply linked, it argues, to caring for ecology and promoting the common good. Authentically lived peace manifests in a balanced lifestyle, combined with a capacity for wonder that leads us to the depths of life.
Nature is full of messages, but we're too busy to hear them.
That's the idea. Nature is full of words of love, but we find it hard to hear them amidst the constant noise, distractions, restless anxiety, or the cult of appearance. A deep imbalance settles in our hearts, leading us to rush, to act without reflection, treating others and the environment without care. Integral ecology, therefore, means taking time to rediscover serenity and harmony, to reflect on our lifestyle and ideals, to contemplate the Creator who lives within us and all around us, whose presence isn't something we fabricate, but something we must discover.
Jesus' example of paying attention is brought up again here.
Yes, the document points to Jesus teaching this attitude, how he stopped to contemplate the lilies and the birds, how he looked at the anxious, rich young man with love. Being fully present to each person and each creature, it suggests, shows us the way to overcome the unhealthy anxiety that leads to shallowness, aggression, and uncontrolled consumerism.
A simple daily practice is also mentioned as helpful: gratitude before eating.
Yes, it encourages the beautiful and ancient habit of stopping to thank God before and after meals. This brief moment, it says, reminds us of our dependence on God for life, expresses gratitude for the gifts of creation, acknowledges the work of those who produce the food, and strengthens solidarity with those most in need.
The document also discusses the role of love, extending it into civil and political life.
Caring for nature, it says, is already part of a lifestyle that includes the capacity for living together and communion. Jesus reminded us that God is our common Father, which makes us brothers and sisters. This sibling love is essentially altruistic, freely given, and should even extend to loving our enemies. This same selflessness, it argues, needs to be applied to our relationship with the world, loving and accepting the wind, the sun, the clouds, just as we accept people. This leads to a universal brotherhood.
So love isn't just for personal relationships. It has a public, social dimension.
Absolutely. Small daily gestures of care are important, but love also overflows into civil and political actions that build a better world. Love for society and commitment to the common good are presented as an extraordinary expression of mercy or charity, not just at the individual level, but also concerning macro relations, all social, economic, political relations. The church offers the ideal of building a civilization of love.
Social love as the key to development.
Social love is seen as the key to authentic development, making society more human. It's the constant and highest norm of all activity. Combined with small daily acts, social love is what drives the design and implementation of great strategies needed to stop environmental destruction and promote a genuine culture of care. Recognizing God's call to act together within this social dynamic is itself a form of spirituality, an exercise of mercy that helps us mature and become holier.
This is where community organizations become so important.
Exactly. Not everyone is called to direct political action, but there are countless organizations working for the common good, caring for the environment, both natural and urban. Examples include groups caring for public places, buildings, fountains, neglected monuments, landscapes. These actions help develop or restore social bonds, creating a new, local social fabric.
Society freeing itself from indifference.
Yes, society can free itself from a cold, consumerist indifference through these actions. They cultivate a shared identity, a common history to preserve. It fosters care for the world and for the quality of life of the poorest, a sense of solidarity and an awareness of the home entrusted to us. This communal action, expressing self-giving love, can be an intense spiritual experience.
The document also touches on sacramental signs and the idea of sacred rest, connecting spirituality directly to the material world.
It says the universe unfolds in God, who fills it completely. Therefore, there's mystical meaning to be found in a leaf, on a mountain trail, in a dewdrop, in the face of a poor person. The ideal isn't just finding God apart from the world, but discovering him in everything around us, as spiritual masters like St. Bonaventure taught.
And St. John of the Cross adds that the good things we find in reality are found in God exceptionally and infinitely.
Yes, quoting him, or rather, each of these sublime realities is God. Not meaning that finite things are literally divine, but that the mystic experiences such an intimate connection between God and all beings that they feel that God is all those things. When admiring the beauty of a mountain, for example, they cannot separate that beauty from God. The admiration itself is attributed to God.
Sacraments are presented as a specific way nature is elevated in this view.
Sacraments are described as a privileged way in which nature is taken up by God to become a mediator of supernatural life. Christian worship isn't detached from the world, it incorporates creation. Water, oil, fire, colors, all are taken up and find meaning in praise. The hand that blesses is an instrument of God's love. The water of baptism is a sign of new life. It stresses that Christianity doesn't involve fleeing the world or denying nature in order to encounter God.
It mentions Eastern Christianity's emphasis on beauty.
Yes, how Eastern Christian spirituality often highlights beauty as expressing the divine harmony present everywhere in the form of a church, sounds, colors, light, aromas. Christian experience, it says, finds that material creatures attain their fullest meaning in the incarnate Word, Jesus Christ. The Son of God united part of the material world to himself, planting a seed of final transformation. Christianity values matter and bodily existence, which finds full expression in the liturgy.
Sunday rest and the Eucharist are given special importance within this liturgical context.
Yes, participating in the Eucharist on Sunday is seen as especially important. Sunday is presented as the day for restoring our relationship with God, with ourselves, with others, and with the world. Sunday is the day of resurrection, the first day of the new creation, whose first fruit is the risen Lord.
The Trinity itself is also connected to creation and our relationships within it.
The document explores this relationship. The Father is the ultimate source of everything. The Son, through whom all things were created, united himself to this earth when he was formed in Mary's womb. The Spirit is the infinite bond of love, intimately present at the heart of the universe, animating and calling forth new pathways. The triune God created all, and the bond of love connects us. The Trinity dwells, in a sense, in the world's temple. God lives in and with his creatures.
This divine relationship of love becomes a model for our own relationships.
It argues that our relationships with God, with others, and with all creatures are what lead to human growth, maturity, and sanctification. By entering into relationship, moving out of ourselves, living in communion with God, others, and all creatures, we welcome this Trinitarian dynamism within us. Everything is interconnected, inviting us towards a spirituality of global solidarity that flows from the mystery of the Trinity itself.
Mary, the mother of Jesus, is also presented as having a specific role related to creation in this final chapter.
Yes. Mary, the mother who cared for Jesus, is now seen as caring for this wounded world with maternal affection and pain. She grieves for the suffering of the poor and for the creatures destroyed by human power. Transfigured, she now lives with Jesus, and all creatures sing of her fairness. As queen of all creation, in her glorified body, part of creation has already reached the fullness of beauty. She understands the meaning of everything. The document suggests we ask her to help us see the world with wiser eyes.
The final section looks beyond the sun, offering a perspective of ultimate hope.
This is the vision of the end times. Ultimately, it says, we will find ourselves face to face with God's infinite beauty, able to joyfully read the mystery of the universe, which will itself share in endless fullness. We are journeying towards the eternal Sabbath, the New Jerusalem, our definitive heavenly home. Jesus says, "Behold, I make all things new."
So eternal life isn't an escape from creation, but it's fulfillment.
That's the vision. Eternal life is presented as an experience of shared wonder, where every transfigured creature takes its rightful place and has something to offer to the poor, who will be freed forever.
So the struggle for the planet today is deeply intertwined with this ultimate hope.
Precisely. Meanwhile, we are united in shouldering the responsibility for the home that has been entrusted to us, knowing that everything good within it will be lifted up to the heavenly feast. We walk on this earth singing, seeking God, because if the world has a beginning and was created, we seek the Creator. Our struggles and our care for the planet should not steal from us the joy of hope.
And it ends with a reminder of God's presence and strength available to us now.
It states that God, who calls us to generous commitment, also gives us the strength and the light we need. The Lord of life loves us so much, is present with us, and does not abandon us. He is definitively united with our earth, and his love constantly impels us to find new paths. Praise him, it concludes.
And the document itself actually includes a specific prayer at the very end, doesn't it?
Yes, two prayers actually. One for sharing with all who believe in a God who is the all-powerful creator, and another for Christians. They essentially pray to the Trinity, asking for strength, light, generosity, care for the weak, prudence for leaders, and express hope for the coming of God's kingdom of justice, peace, love, and beauty. It's a powerful culmination of all the themes explored.
Wow. We've really traversed a vast landscape of ideas in this deep dive. I mean, from the stark diagnosis of the environmental and social crisis, through the spiritual insights from faith and the interconnectedness of all creation, into the human roots of our problems in technology and culture, exploring that comprehensive framework of integral ecology, outlining concrete steps for action from global to local, and finally, emphasizing the need for profound personal and communal transformation rooted in education, spirituality, and ultimately, a vision of hope and communion. It's far more than just an environmental document, isn't it? It's a deeply integrated vision of life itself.
It truly is. It argues consistently that the environmental crisis is fundamentally intertwined with a human and social crisis. Overcoming it, therefore, demands not just technical fixes, but a deep, profound change in how we live, our culture, our relationships with each other, with nature, and for believers, with the divine guided by these principles of integral ecology, justice, and love. It's really a call for a holistic conversion, a change of heart and mind.
So for you listening, this document, coming from a specific faith background, but explicitly speaking to everyone, it really challenges many assumptions embedded in modern life. It makes you think about what progress really means, about what and how much you consume, about your actual place within the natural world, and about how you relate to others, especially those who are most vulnerable or excluded.
It invites you to see yourself not as separate from the world or just a consumer operating within it, but as part of this vast, interconnected web of life, a universal family sharing a common home, as it puts it. It's a challenge to look honestly at your own lifestyle, its impact, and perhaps consider how your own inner peace might actually be linked to the health of the environment and the active pursuit of justice for all.
And here's where it gets really interesting and maybe, quite challenging personally. The document suggests that true inner peace is inseparable from caring for the environment and pursuing social justice. What would it actually mean for your life to try and live with that kind of radical interconnectedness and balance? How did the idea of seeing God, or perhaps whatever higher power you believe in, or maybe simply seeing the sacred present in every leaf, every trail, every dewdrop in the face of the poor, how might that change how you view the world and your actions within it day to day? That's something profound to ponder long after this deep dive finishes.
That's definitely a thought worth carrying with you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Laudato Si. We really hope it sparks further reflection and exploration for you on these complex and vital issues.